so glad that you guys are here today. As Jeremy said, we're wrapping up this series called Rise Up. And if you're a guest, one of the things that we say at Hope City all the time is Hope City is a place where you can belong before you believe. And so no matter what your church background is, no matter what your religious background might be, we hope that as you leave here today, you may not agree with everything that we do or everything that we say, but we hope at the end of the day that you felt welcome, you felt at home. And if we can provide a place where you feel welcome, we feel like that is the conduit for God to show up in a transcendent moment where heaven can touch earth and God can speak to your heart. And so that's what we've been asking God to do over the last few weeks in this teaching series. We want 2018 to be different, right? We want 2018 to be different than 2017. We said, hey, we want to rise up over the things that have been holding us back. And so the first week we talked about rising up over our past, and we said, hey, we're not going to be different. We're not going to have a different 2018 if we keep on dragging the past into our present. It's going to hijack our future. And then the next week we talked about loneliness and how God wants to step into our loneliness, and God has created us for a relationship, and that no spiritual growth happens outside of a Sunday morning context without community. Right? That Sunday morning is the igniter of our spiritual life. It's the pick-me-up for our spiritual life, but sustained life change happens best in the context of relationships, that God created us for relationships. And then the next week we talked about, Trish talked about fear and how we can overcome fear and how God speaks and steps into our fear and gives us courage. And we talked about the person of Esther. And then last week we talked about insecurity, how all of us struggle with insecurity, and all of us have these things in our life that that hold us down and give us pause and cause us to doubt ourselves and question our abilities. But God has set us apart, and God has called us, and God has given us the security of His presence in our life, and that overcomes any insecurity that we feel. So our 2018 is the mantra. We're going to rise up over these things that are holding us back. Well, as we started this series, we put Post-it notes on the wall of things that we wanted to rise up against in 2018, and you guys wrote those down anonymously, which I love because they were actually honest, because they were anonymous, and so people were really vulnerable and said, here's what's holding me back. And insecurity was the number one answer. The second answer was finances. And so I want to talk today about how we can rise up over finances, because here's the guiding question that we've been asking for this whole series is, do I like who I'm becoming? Do I like who I am becoming? Do I like the person that I'm becoming? Do I like the mom I'm becoming? Do I like the dad that I'm becoming? Do I like the wife or the husband or the girlfriend or boyfriend or the employee, the friend? Do I like who I'm becoming? And part of that is, if we're going to like who we're becoming, we need to overcome our insecurities. We need to not live for the popular opinion or the opinion of other people. We need to live in the life that God has called us to be. But then also, we need to do an inventory of the generosity in our life. Am I becoming a more generous person? Am I becoming a more giving person? Am I becoming a more patient person? Not just our behavior, right? What needs to change is our heart. And so as we ask this question, do I like who I'm becoming? It has less to do with your behavior and more to do with, are you more patient? Are you more kind? Are you more giving? Are you more selfless? Like, those are the things that will sustain the life that you long to live. You can have a greater quality of life, but if our heart doesn't change, then we're just going to be the same people in different circumstances. And so this guiding question of, do I like who I'm becoming, is really going to guide our talk today. And I want to talk about how we can rise up in our finances. And specifically, I want to talk about how, as followers of Jesus, we can rise up in the area of generosity. Now, if you're not a follower of Christ, or this is the first time that you've ever been to Hope City, or you're just kind of on the fence of your faith, then I'm really glad that you're here, because I believe that the church, people who call themselves Christians, should be the most generous people. And so I think you'll get a bird's eye view of who we want to be. Not all of us, I'm not there, I'm not as generous as I want to be, but I want to be more like Christ, and Christ gave up everything. And so how can we grow and rise up in our generosity? And if I'm being honest with you, I think there's two principles that have changed my life in ways that I could never have imagined. And the first is learning to be a person of truth. Like learning to live with integrity. I struggled with that for many years. And once I really began to learn what it was to be a person of truth and to speak truth into my relationships, speak truth in my relationship with God, speak truth in my marriage, my life began to change. And then I think that the other principle that has changed me more than anything else has been this principle of generosity. I have notoriously been a person that has had a scarcity mindset. I could never have enough or get enough. I grew up really poor. I'm going to talk about that in a second. And so I had this overwhelming fear that if I was a generous person, that I would not have enough. And I think as I've grown, as I've matured, and as God used my wife, my family, and a number of different circumstances to grow me in this area of generosity, I've seen it change my heart. I've seen it change my life. And honestly, I've seen it change our church. And now, here's the deal. You might be thinking, well, you're the pastor of the church. Of course you want Hope City to be generous. Like, we pay you, all right? Like, there's a vested interest in the offering. The reason we already took the offering, okay? So it doesn't really matter what, and I get your point. I can't deny that. But what I want to teach you today is I want to teach you this concept of generosity, and it has less to do with Hope City and more to do with our hearts. And here's why I think I can say this with honesty. I'm a product of the generosity of Christ followers. Like I would not be here had there not been a group of people in my life that gave faithfully. I grew up in the church, and I was going through a really difficult time when I was in 7th and 8th grade. I got bullied almost every day. I had ulcers because I had given myself ulcers because I was so worried and so nervous about going to school because I was getting beat up. I got my head slammed in a locker. My mom then went to the school. With those of you that have been bullied, oh my gosh, that's worse, right? Like, the worst thing that can happen is if your mom goes to school and talks to the principal about being bullied, because then it just gets worse. And so I was being ostracized at school in an unbelievable way, to the point where I was losing weight. I did not want to go. I hated school. I hated being there. I felt like I had no friends. And in 7th grade, I had a youth pastor. And we went to the Country Club Church. I don't know if you guys had these in your town, but our pastor lived on Country Club Road, which was the golf course in town in Crawfordsville. And a lot of people from the church were really well off, and they lived on Country Club Road. So everybody called it the Country Club Church. And my family was extremely poor, and we were not popular. And here I am getting bullied at school, and my youth pastor comes to me over all of the popular kids, the more gifted kids, the kids that would have been a better choice. And he said, hey, we're having this youth Sunday in a few months, and rather than me speak at the youth Sunday, the students are going to do the entire service. I want you to give the message. And I'd never given a message before. And here I am, I'm 13 years old, I'm standing up in front of a crowd of a lot of white and gray hair, and I'm giving a 30-minute message on Peter stepping out of the boat, trusting God in his faith. And I look back on that, and I think, would I be standing here today had this church not hired this youth pastor, had people not given faithfully to support the youth pastor that then came to me and said, hey, I want you to do this message. And it changed the trajectory of my life. It was the first person that ever said to me, hey, I see some gifts in you. I see some ability in you. I think God could actually use you. This same church, my dad lost his job when I was in 8th grade. And we were already poor, but we really hit rock bottom when my dad lost his job. He was out of work for an extended amount of time, and we did not have any food in the house. And we were eating beans, and my mom was trying to make soup beans go as far as possible because that was the cheapest thing you could buy. And I knew that we were in bad shape when we were eating beans or hot dogs, right? Or Spam. Spam was like, we're definitely like almost starving. And so we'd have beans, we'd have Spam and all this stuff. And I'll never forget showing up after school, and there was a note on the door, a card that was taped to the door, and there was groceries that covered the front of our porch. And the note said, to Ed and Claudia. And my mom opened it up, and there was cash in it to pay our rent. And there was groceries that were covering the porch. And it said, from your Woodland Heights Christian Church Sunday school class. And there was just this overwhelming sense of peace, this overwhelming sense of exhale that, okay, we're going to make it. My dad ended up finding a job, and we didn't get rich, but we were able to pay our bills, we were able to buy food. But it was that moment that the church stepped in and provided generosity in a way that changed the dynamic of our family situation at that time. It changed my life. Long before Hope City ever paid me a dime, the generosity of followers of Jesus changed me. This summer, I saw generosity transform our entire family and really transform our church. Those of you that have been around a while, you know that in June we adopted 2 kids, Janiah, who's 8, and Jalen, who's 10. And so we go through this process, and the process, as I've said before, it happened very quickly. We found out about the kids on June 1st. June 21st, they came to live with us. And so we go through this process, and we start filling out this application. We meet the mom, we meet the kids, we decide that we're going to do this, and then we say, this is kind of how this is life with me. You'll have a greater appreciation for my wife when you hear this. Then I said, oh, how much is this going to cost? Like we didn't even think about that, right? And the lady texts me. She's like $28,750. And I'll never forget texting her back. I was like, well, at least we'll know God's in this if it happens. Because I didn't have $28,000. We had a kid that just graduated from high school. We had a kid that just got engaged. Both of them were going to be in college. And so, like, all of the reserves that we had were completely gone. And we put this post on youcaring.com. And many of you know this. And we tried to keep it as separate from the church as possible. And people from all over the country start donating to this thing. We had a person that lives in Texas that I've never even met. She's a friend of a friend of a friend. And she has lost several pregnancies and wasn't able to have kids, and so she had to adopt, or had the opportunity to adopt, and is passionate about adoption. And she heard about our story through a friend of a friend and gave us $1,000. We had a church in Cincinnati that texted me and said, hey, if we give you $4,000, would you and your wife come and do a marriage conference for us this fall for free? Like, just people, many of you gave to that campaign. We raised $30,000 in 8 days. Just like generosity overload. And can I tell you that you didn't give to Justin and Trisha, right? Like, if you gave to that, people didn't give to Justin and Trisha. They gave to change the trajectory of two kids' lives. When you see our kids walking around here, you don't think, oh, there's $20 walking around. Like if you gave $20, right? You don't think that, right? Because you know that that's a human life, and that their future has been altered. And I believe their eternity has been changed because they're around you. They're here in a community. See, generosity isn't just the money that we give. It's not just the things that we give. It's the mindset that we have. And it changes everything. I've grown in my faith, and I've grown in my joy, and I've grown in my trust with God more than any other aspect of my life through the process of generosity. And I haven't always gotten it right. When Trish and I moved here to start Hope City, we cashed in everything. We cashed in all of our savings. We didn't take a salary from the church for over a year. We had other streams of income. And we just decided we're going to give 10% of every dollar that we make back to Hope City. And we're just going to trust that it works out. And it wasn't this big sacrificial thing that we were doing. It was just what we felt called to do. And so I can tell you with honesty that this isn't about my paycheck. This is about who I want us to become as people. Because I've seen generosity shape me. I've seen it shape an 8 and 10-year-old kid. And I've seen it shape the people that I love the most. And it changes the trajectory of our life. As we've given as a family, God has blessed our life and family exponentially more than I could have ever asked or imagined. So here's kind of the big idea that we're going to talk about today. Rising up in our finances isn't about the money that we give to God, but it's the trust that we have in Him. See, God doesn't need our money. He doesn't need our finances. And if somebody came to me and they said, hey, I'm struggling financially, I would not tell them to go make more money. I want to ask them, the first question I would ask would not be, how much money do you make? If somebody comes to me and they say they're struggling in their marriage, I don't say to them, well, how often are you communicating? I don't talk about behavior. I want to talk about heart. So I would say to someone who's struggling in their marriage, are you sharing truth? Are you pursuing God? Are you prioritizing time? Are you and your wife having intimate conversations? Like there's heart issues that drive our behavior. The same is true if somebody came to me and said, hey, I'm struggling financially. I wouldn't say, well, hey, just go get a part-time job. Because the struggle of the finances is the pain, but the symptom, that might be just a symptom of much deeper issues. So I want to talk about what our heart looks like. God doesn't need our money, He wants our heart. And every time we choose to be generous, every time we choose to give, we make a declaration of our trust in God as our provider. So we rise up when we choose to honor God with our resources. And over the last few weeks, we've been talking about like all that we're counting on God to do, right? Like we're counting on God to take away our past. We're counting on God to give us a clean slate. We're counting on God to make us brand new. We're counting on God to take away our shame and our guilt from the mistakes that we've made. We're counting on God for that. We trust Him to do that. We're trusting God to overcome our fear. We're trusting God that He is bigger and stronger than every fear that we face. We're trusting God that He's going to give us courage when we fear the most. We trust God with our loneliness. We trust God with our relationships. We say, okay, God, I feel lonely, I feel alone, I feel isolated, but I'm going to trust you with that. Last week we talked about I'm going to trust God with my insecurity. I'm going to give him all of my deficiencies. I'm going to give him all my insecurities. Every time I feel weak or not enough. It's just hard to trust him with our money, right? Like it's just so difficult. I put it this way. It's easier to trust God with our eternity than it is our money. I don't know, maybe that's just me. Now this obviously isn't a spiritual truth. This is more of an emotional truth. But I trust God to take away my sins. I trust that Jesus came out of heaven, lived a sinless life for 33 years, died on a cross, took on my sin, my shame, all of my mistakes, gave me a new start and forgiveness of sin, and now is preparing a place in heaven for me, but then I get all anxious when he asks for a portion of what I make. You know what I'm saying? Like, isn't that kind of whack when you say it that way? Like, we can trust that God is going to carry us for all of eternity after we die. I just don't know if I'm going to make it till Friday. Right? If I give you this $20, okay? Like I just think that that's just kind of a whack mindset. Obviously, it's not a theological belief because we all trust God way more than the money that we make. It's just this emotional reaction. Look at Genesis chapter 3, verse 1. This is Satan talking to Eve. It says, he said to the woman, did God really say you must not eat from any tree of the garden? And if you go back and you look at the book of Genesis, what God said is, hey, I'm giving you everything. You can have the entire garden. You can run around. You can eat anything. You can do anything. You can have anything that you want. There's one tree in the center that I want you to stay away from. And so Adam and Eve are enjoying God's presence, and they're enjoying intimacy with God, and they're completely known by God, and God is speaking to them and walking with them in the cool of the day. And then Satan approaches Eve, and he does not take the fruit from the forbidden tree that God said not to eat from off the tree and shove it into her mouth. He simply says one question. Did God really say that you can't eat from any tree in the garden? You see how he twists it? God says you can eat from any tree but one. And Satan says, did God really say you can't eat from any tree? He just poses this question, and the implication here is God is holding out on you. There is something good that this life offers, and God is keeping it from you. God is holding you back. God can't be trusted. Did God really say you can't eat from any tree in the garden? I have no problem believing that Jesus came to earth and lived a perfect life and died on the cross, but giving him back a portion of what I make is really hard. And so here's what I'd like to do with the time we have left. I'd like to identify the four stages, as I see it, of giving that we all go through, okay? Or that are kind of a part of our DNA. And here's how giving almost always works. So over here, there are kind of these different progressions that we make as we follow God. This is what I would call a rookie giver. And it could be a one-time gift. It could be this something that has inspired you. It could be something that has really broken your heart. It could be something that you're really passionate about. And you choose to say, okay, I'm going to give to this. And this is a really big deal. Like when you choose to give back to God, you're acknowledging in your heart and in your mind that there is something bigger than you, that there's a cause bigger than your needs, that there's something that your heart could beat for. And this person that says, hey, you know what? I'm going to step outside my comfort zone. I'm going to, in faith, I'm going to give back to God a gift that can be used to make this world a better place. Maybe that's to a church. Maybe that's to a nonprofit. Maybe that's to the United Way. But there's this moment in time where you decide, I'm going to be generous in this moment. And then as you grow in a relationship with God, you begin to align your heart more with who God is and what he longs for your life. And then the next step is a person that moves from a one-time gift or a random gift to a reoccurring giver. And this person says, you know what? I want giving to be a part of my DNA. I want giving to be a part of my life. I want it to be something that I do on a regular basis. And so it's not this one-time random thing. It's not this one-time thing that's sporadic or it's inspired by a current event or a good message or whatever. It's this reoccurring, it's this pattern of life. It's this habit that I want to get into that I want to say, okay, I want to schedule. I want to make giving a matter of priority in my life. And so I'm going to schedule. I'm going to reoccur it. I'm going to make it a priority. People say to God, I want to be a consistent giver. And then the question that most people ask in this stage of giving is, how much can I afford? Like, how much can we afford to give? The next stage would be what I would call a relational giver. And a relational giver is somebody who they've been a rookie giver, and then they move into this reoccurring where they try to make giving a part of their DNA. They try to make giving a part of their lifestyle. They want God to be honored in their finances. How much can I afford to give? And then a relational giver says, you know what? I really believe that God is who he says he is. And I really believe that God is going to provide for my needs. And so the question here isn't how much can I afford to give. The question here is, what would honor God? Like, what would honor God for me to give back to him? And really, that is, for our family, the answer to that question is we give 10%. The first 10% of everything that we make goes back to the church. We give a little bit over that to other nonprofits. But the first 10% of what we make, that's what we feel like as a family is honoring to God. That's just where we are. And it's not based on obligation. It's not based on guilt. It's not based on shame. It's not based on a Sunday school class that you were in third grade where, your Sunday school teacher hit you with a ruler if you didn't, bring offering. It's not based on any of that. This is a relationship. This says, hey, I trust you, God. I trust you to provide for my needs. Then the next stage, the final stage, and this is one I've visited, and I want it to be more of who I am. This is what I would call a radical giver. This is the type of giving where a person says, okay, I've prioritized it. Now my giving's based on a relationship, but now I'm going to give over and above what I feel like God's called me to do to invest in the kingdom of God. And if I'm just being straight up honest with you, we would not be sitting here today if we did not have a few people who gave at this level of giving a few months ago. We had people that in our church that stepped up, and I got text messages as soon as we identified this building, and they said, hey, I'll give an extra X amount of dollars. Like there was this radical vision that they had of what this facility could mean for us as a tool. It wasn't going to be the destination. It was a tool that God could use, and without their radical vision, without their radical obedience, without them saying, hey, I'm going to be sacrificial, and I'm going to give over and above what I typically give to make this dream a reality. And if I'm just being honest with you, like I've been there, I don't live there. I want to be radical. I do. And I think I have 2 kids in college, right? So I'm just being straight up honest with you. I go back and forth. Trusting God, not trusting God, trusting God, oh my gosh. And so there's this aspect of our life that as we grow in our relationship with Christ, he grows our trust in him. He does not always grow our resources, but he grows our trust. And what we're able to do with the resources God has given us, because all of us have been given different amounts of resources, isn't based on necessarily your bottom line or your tax bracket. I think it's based on how much we honor God with what he has given us. And so if you're a follower of Jesus and you call Hope City your home, here's what I'd like to propose to you. I'd like to propose that you leave here today and you just identify what stage you're in. Okay, there's no judgment of what stage you're in. If you're not even a follower of Jesus, I have zero hesitation of saying, hey, would you just choose to maybe to be a rookie giver? Like if you've never given before, just try it. Just you know why? Because I think all of us would agree that we all want to be a part of something that improves our world. And I think you would not be here today if you didn't think the church had a role in improving our world. And so maybe just, give $5 or give $10 or just step out and give something. If you're a rookie giver and you haven't really given a second thought, just choose to try a reoccurring giver and move one step in this direction. That's my challenge to you. Because here's the question I want us to close with as we wind down today. I want you to ask this question as you leave. God, how can we as a family honor you with our resources? What does it look like, God, for me to honor you personally? What does it look like for me to honor you as a family with our resources? So let me just give you 3 practical things as we close. I don't even know what time it is. Okay, 10. Okay, good. I'm okay on time. Connor, I'm okay on time. Okay. First off, we can honor God's provision. We can honor God's provision. When we choose to progress in our trust of God, we honor God's provision. Look at Deuteronomy chapter 8, verse 18. It says, "But remember the Lord your God, for it is he who gives you the ability to produce wealth." The times I've been most reluctant to be generous have been the times that I thought my wealth was up to me. Like I'm no different than you guys. Like I have bills, I have responsibilities, I have debts, I have kids who are like this, and so I am no different. And I can get into this mode where I can think, if I want more, I need to work harder. Like at some level, I'm in control of my provision. And I think that this passage in Deuteronomy says, hey, it is God who gives you the ability to produce wealth. See, generosity comes so much easier for me when I remember that God owns everything, even my ability to make money. And if you have kids, or especially teenagers, you're familiar with this concept where I'm constantly having to remind one of my 3 teenagers, or I guess 20-year-old down to teenagers, like, hey, like the car that you drive, we own it. The gas that is in your car, we provided it. The tuition that you are a beneficiary of, we paid it. The shoes that you have, we bought them. Like, there's this reminder, right? The other day, I'm talking to Jalen, and he had just gotten Chick-fil-A, and he got 12 nuggets. What 10-year-old needs 12 chicken nuggets? And I said, hey, give me one of those chicken nuggets, buddy. He's like, are you kidding me? No, these are my chicken nuggets. And I said, Jalen, did you buy the chicken that sacrificed his life for those chicken nuggets? Then I go into my dad, like I become my father, right? Like, did you buy the chicken that sacrificed his life to become the chicken nuggets? Did you buy the cardboard that those chicken nuggets are wrapped in? Did you make the money that just paid for those chicken nuggets? I own them. So give me one of those chicken nuggets. I'm not even asking for a 10th. I'm asking for a 12th, right? Like, I'm less greedy than God, okay? Just give me one of the chicken nuggets. He's like, fine. Right? And he had this concept in his mind that he owns it. And I was like, eating that chicken nugget, I was so hacked off at him. Like, the audacity for him to withhold a chicken nugget from me I just paid for. And then it was like this voice came, it's exactly what you do with me. Like, that's exactly what I do with God. Like, I have this belief that somehow, even though God provides everything, I own it all. And then God asked for a portion of it back. I'm like, are you kidding me? You know how hard I work for this? And God is saying, hey, you're going to be more generous when you realize that even your ability to produce wealth, I gave it to you. Secondly, we can honor God's purpose. When we're generous, we honor God's purpose. 2 Corinthians 5:18 and 19 says this, all of this is a gift from God who brought us back to himself through Christ. And God has given us the task of reconciling people to himself. For God was in Christ, reconciling the world to himself, no longer counting people's sins against them. And he gave us this wonderful message of reconciliation. You know what God's purpose is? It's not to make people feel guilty. It's not to bring judgment onto people. You know what God's heart beats for? Restoring every person to himself. Like that song that we sang, the Reckless Love song, the reason why it wrecks me so much is it just paints this picture of a God who will go to the ends of the earth to find you. Like, Adam and Eve, they bought into this idea that God was holding out on them. And she took the fruit that she wasn't supposed to eat, and she ate it. And it severed her relationship with God. And you know what God's response was? Went searching for her. God was unfazed. He was disappointed. He was heartbroken. But he went searching for her. Right? And that's God's purpose. And when you and I are generous, you buy into God's purpose. You know how God accomplishes his purpose in this world? Through the church. You know who the church is? You and I. So when you give here on Sundays, you don't give to the church. You give to God's purpose through the church. Right? You're not giving to an organization. You're giving to a people. You're giving to a purpose. You're giving to something so much bigger than yourself. I've gotten a couple emails. I just want to share portions of them with you. It'll help maintain their anonymity. But this is just a few over the last couple weeks. Today's service was impressive. All I can say is, wow, each week it gets better and better. I didn't grow up in the church and never felt like I belonged in a church until now. I proudly call Hope City my church home. Thank you for showing me Christ does exist and I have a home now. Another email. I have friends who battle addictions and don't feel worthy even to attend church. You boldly and loudly put Hope City, you put the welcome flag in the ground on Sunday morning at Hope City, and it was so great to hear. Hey, Justin, I just want to take a minute and say thank you. Your transparency and how you own your struggles is what makes me want to make Hope City my home. Thank you for all that you do, and thank you for keeping it real. See, we get to be a part of something so much bigger than ourselves. We get to be a part of this organization, this organism, this living, breathing organism that is bringing people hope and healing and second chances. And I'm just going to be honest with this. I'm just speaking for me. I think I'm speaking for my family. I want to give the best years of my life and the best dollars that I make to that. Because all that is going to last into eternity is people. And so when I get sideways with this, I have to remember, okay, God's purpose isn't to get my money. God's purpose is to bring people back to himself. And I get to be a part of that. We get invited into that eternal plan, that eternal purpose. Finally, when we choose to be generous, we honor God's priorities. Proverbs chapter 3, verse 9 and 10 says, honor the Lord with your wealth, with the first fruits of all of your crops. Remember, they're in an agricultural system, right? So he's using a metaphor that they would definitely relate to. Then your barns will be filled to overflowing, and your vats will brim over with new wine. Last week, my 8th grade son and I were driving to church, and Trish and I have our giving set up on our app. It's automated. It's based on when we get paid. And so most of the giving that we have is automated. Well, those of you that know us, we wrote a book 5 years ago. We travel and speak on the weekends. February is a really busy month for us. And so it's the love month. And so all these churches want us to come and do marriage events during the month of February. And so over the last 3 or 4 weeks, and over the next couple of weeks, Friday and Saturday, we were at different churches. Yesterday, we were in, I don't know where, Virginia. Okay, I couldn't remember. We were in Virginia, and we got back last night. And so I had a check written out in my car as giving 10% of what we had made on the last couple weeks of speaking engagements. And Isaiah and I are in this conversation. He's not here today because he's in Portland, Oregon at a travel basketball trip. And he's by himself, and we're talking about how this, we're got a wedding to pay for or help pay for. We've got, kids in college. We have 2 additional kids now. Like, there's some things that we're going to have to prioritize. And I said, and one of those things is we're not going to be able to go to a lot of your travel basketball games. Team Teague is who he plays for. They cover all of his expenses. And so I said, it's just a reality. And as I say that, the check that I had written to the church falls out of the sun visor and down onto his lap. And he picks it up and he looks at it, and it wasn't thousands of dollars, but he's like, well, this could be a plane ticket. And he didn't say it like you're a horrible dad, I'm going to be in counseling. He was kind of sarcastic, like, well, hey, you're talking about not having any money. This could be a plane ticket. And I said, you're right, it could. And I said, but here's the deal. Here's the choice that we made as a family. We made a choice as a family that we're going to give God out of the first things that we have. Otherwise, we end up giving him what's left. And when I'm around, there's not much that's left. And I said, so that's just kind of who we are. And it was just this teaching moment that I got to share with him kind of the value system of our family. And he knows that our boys know, hey, mom and dad give back to the church. But it was just this practical teaching moment where it says, you know what? 90% of God's blessing is better than 100% of my own provision. And I stand by that. And that's completely up to you guys and how you want to live that out in your own life. But here's what I do know. As we trust God with more, we realize God can be trusted. There's this aspect last week when we talked about how sometimes God allows us to feel insufficient so that he can be all sufficient for us. And I think the same is true in our financial world. I think there are times that God allows us to feel some pain financially because it gets our attention, just to realize that he can be trusted. And I don't know where you line up in this, and this is a guilt-free church, right? We say all the time, if you're a guest here, even if you, I'll say this, no matter what church you go to, I want you to be generous to it. So if Hope City isn't the church for you, if you end up going to Grace or Mercy Road or Traders Point or College Park, I would hope that you would believe in the mission and vision of that church enough and God's plan enough to be generous to it, even if that's not here. Because I believe that as we trust God more, we realize that God can be trusted more. And if you're a rookie giver, I want to say thank you. Would you consider taking the next step? If you're a reoccurring giver, I want to say thank you. Would you consider taking the next step? If you're a relational giver, I want to say thank you. What does it look like to be radical? Can you grow into that over time? And I'm on this journey with you. And I'm constantly evaluating. We're constantly evaluating how can we be more generous and how can we demonstrate that we trust God more. Not that God's going to, that passage says he's going to overflow your barns. It's not a dollar for dollar thing. If you get $100 today, God's not going to give you $1,000 tomorrow. I mean, he might. It's a provision thing. It's a declaration that, hey, God can be trusted. It's God that provides. And we're just called to manage the resources and how we rise up in our finances is surrender. It's this counterintuitive thing. We rise up financially by actually giving more.